Jeff Boarini, candidate for mayor. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
We'll jump right into it. As we sit here today, it is Thursday, February 25th. We are 33 days away from Election Day, 18 days away from early voting starting.
Yep.
How are you feeling? What are you up to? What's the activity like at Team Boarini?
I'm optimistic. I'm enthused about where we are. You know, being a candidate running against someone with great recognition, I am keenly aware that I need more time. At the same time, I'll be glad when it's over. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. It's different work than I expected, but it's been great to meet so many excellent people around Evanston. So I've enjoyed the process, and I would say, having learned what I've learned, I'd do it again.
So as you're talking to voters and meeting new people, what are the major themes that are coming up about the election, about your candidacy, anything else?
It's funny. It does vary from area around town, and I'm sure you've experienced this too. That if you're up north, the relationship with Northwestern is much more important. If you're downtown, it's the issue of density and tall buildings and such. So it does go around there. D65 is of course a big issue. Envision Evanston seems to be everywhere as well too. Affordability, affordable housing, economic revitalization, downtown Evanston, those are the big issues that come up repeatedly throughout the city.
Well, we can jump right into one of the biggest ones. And
you had a second part to that question, and I forgot.
Oh, just about your candidacy as well. If any major themes have come up in talking to people. You mentioned name recognition before, being something about that. Any common questions come up?
People want to know my thoughts on things, of course, why I think I can do this job. And so what I bring up to them is my leadership on the nonprofit boards, and then my time at McDonald's Corporation as a middle manager. And if you know anything about a middle manager role, it's a job that has often a lot of responsibility and very little power. So I've learned through experience to work in 360 degrees with people who report up through me, peers, colleagues in other departments, and then of course management as well too. So that's how I think I can work effectively as mayor in Evanston.
Gotcha. So jumping over to Envision Evanston, certainly one of, if not the largest issues of this campaign on the city side. We're entering a new phase with the revised draft being released on Friday. And as of just last night, the Land Use Commission officially saying the plan won't be adopted in time for the election before April 1st. So this will be an issue for the next council to take up. Have you had time to read through the revised draft yet? And what are your thoughts on the direction it's taking overall?
I have not had time to look at the revised plan just yet. I've been campaigning. There's very little time for anything else, but I look forward to that. I'm very glad that the City Council, first of all, decoupled the comprehensive plan from the creation of the zoning underneath it. And I'm glad to hear that the Land Use Commission has decided to slow this down and do a more thorough job. It's an incredibly complex process to try to get this right. And so I think giving the new council time to vet this properly and to certainly add more data, specifically data that would apply to Evanston or be based on Evanston, is incredibly important to get this correct. So I'm very glad about that. I would think also then that once we get the comprehensive plan finished, then we can start writing code. I think we should not write any code or carry over anything here, but start anew and create the code underneath that, the new comprehensive plan. And the comprehensive plan is about taking the best of what we think Evanston is and projecting it 20 years into the future. I don't think it's overly optimistic to have some kind of excitement and enthusiasm about parts of that. It's been very contentious with what we've had. So I'm hopeful that taking more time gives us the room to build in some things that have more general acceptance and enthusiasm behind them too.
Gotcha. And kind of building on that with taking the best of what's currently in Evanston, projecting it out, how do you think the comprehensive plan specifically, not the zoning code yet, should account for making an Evanston for future generations as well, whether that's, current children growing up in Evanston or people who will move here over the next 20 years?
That's a really good question. And I think we have to look first to the best of what we are right now and see, can that stand the test of time? And everyone says, I love Evanston. And which Evanston are you talking about? Evanston of 20 years ago or today or whatever? It's going to change. It's going to change. And hopefully that great change is gradual and people accept it and build that in. So thinking of future generations, we have to think of that, what we love about Evanston today, and then, of course, the world of tomorrow. And that applies certainly with our climate goals and affordability and all those pieces. So we have to try to project what that's going to be like. Not an easy task. Most cities take 3-4 years to do this kind of thing. And so again, I'm glad we're slowing this down and can try to build that in. And with data that's specific to Evanston, maybe we stand a chance of getting it more correct.
Gotcha. So zeroing in on housing specifically, you say on your campaign website that Envision should deliver true affordable housing. And you've talked a lot about kind of non-market rate development strategies like land trusts, equity co-ops. Some of these are addressed in the plan. But I wanted to ask, from your perspective, even if greater market rate development doesn't take a leading role, does it play any role in how you see, housing cost burdens being relieved in Evanston? Can it play a smaller role, or should we really not be looking at that as part of the solution?
I don't know that we can trust the market to deliver that. If it does, it would be a great thing. And perhaps in certain areas of town, it might do that if we added enough housing. If the argument of basic supply and demand holds true, that should come to pass. The developers we've seen haven't advocated for that at all. They say that's not what the market does. So I'm not optimistic. I come back to the sale of the E2 building for $148 million at $400,000 a unit, a record price. And right now, between Main Street and downtown Evanston, there are over 1,000 units projected to come onto the market. Knowing that, these people paid that amount of money for that building, so they are making a $148 million bet that rents are not going down anytime soon. So I'm not optimistic about the market delivering any kind of affordability.
Coming back to the question about market rate, so say market may not necessarily be able to be trusted for that, but also these other things like the land trusts, co-ops, these things take time to build out. In the more immediate term, maybe over the literal term of the next 4 years, but more generally 5 to 10, as those things could be built up, what should be done more immediately to help address the high cost of housing and increasing pressures for people to be displaced in Evanston?
I think, though it will likely be small, whatever we can do to hold down taxes will be good. We play the city budget is a small part of the overall tax burden. If there's anything we can do to, keep our budget in line, that would help. That help even a small amount of that. That said, maybe if we can find some reductions in the city budget, maybe we can reduce some of the cost of living charges, like fees and fines and permits and applications and all the costs that we pile on to residents that way as well too. In terms of affordable housing, that's maybe things we could consider are like some down payment support for people. That would be one thing with a city fund. Another, I'm told, is that a number of people who might be able to afford their monthly rent can't get together the first and last month's rent. So could we give them a bridge loan of something like that to get them into housing now and be able to stay there that way? So those might be some things that we could do shorter term.
Gotcha. And thinking about the zoning code, it will be a lot further in the future that this is developed after the comp plan is done. But you've criticized the previous drafts of the code as, I believe the phrasing is like one size fits most approach as a citywide brush.
Mm-hmm.
How do you think zoning should be developed on the smaller basis, on the individualized basis? Like, are you talking about a neighborhood to neighborhood, block by block kind of approach? And then how much should current residents or homeowners there control the zoning of the area, for not only themselves, but for future generations, as opposed to taking the, professional perspective from staff and elected officials?
Okay. I think
Big
that
question, but
I was going to say it's a long question. Well, you can expect a long answer. No, I think that's been part of the angst of the whole zoning plan, and so addressing the one size fits most, reducing it to from 17 down to a handful of zoning districts, I think was too much, and people reacted to that quite vocally, to saying we need different things, and it's funny in all the discussions people keep talking about how different Evanston is from area to area, downtown to South Evanston, from South Central Evanston to Northeast Evanston. They're all very different in their makeup. So I would hope that we might be able to almost go on a ward or precinct by basis about what a neighborhood might be, what a block might be, as opposed to an actual city block. I think we can probably do something broader than that. And in terms of public input, if we let people know what's coming into a neighborhood, I think we could possibly get some input that way. I think, hopefully, with the comprehensive plan coming around and being taken longer, we can put in some details that maybe let people relax a little bit about some of what the zoning might be. What we saw from people who were opposed to the proposed comprehensive plan and zoning was, some blocks of this is what the worst of the zoning might look like. We never saw anybody put anything forward that says, this is what it might be good. Here's what a good duplex might look like on a block. Or things like distance regulation, so spacing, so that we could have one type of building here and 500, nothing changes for 500 feet, to allow for some gradual change and people getting used to things. And maybe I think part of it is just the human ability to sort of project the worst sometimes if there's no information. So maybe if we give people better information and better input about what might be possible with the new proposed plan and the new proposed zoning, they won't feel quite as much need to bang the table or speak up about these things.
And then very quickly, and I'll ask this briefly, on the biggest and most attention-drawing proposal of allowing 2 to 4 unit developments in what's currently single-family zoned areas, do you think that is appropriate at any point or at any place throughout Evanston, or should we put that aside completely?
I think it might, and I put this with a cautionary note, it might be possible in some areas. For example, if you had a fourplex on a corner lot, might it work out that it wouldn't be looming over people quite so much? I think one of the things that was also produced a lot of anxiety was expanding the setbacks to 3 feet. If you kept that back to its original 5 feet and put a fourplex on a corner lot, it might be acceptable to the neighborhood. I don't think it's necessarily going to be any cheaper. And again, I think we should have spacing regulations so you don't suddenly have 4 or 5 of those on a block up here and change the character of the block. But those are relatively few. Again, you look at some of the areas around town where houses are very close together, a fourplex is just going to dwarf things and be very uncomfortable. And on the other hand, the larger lots are going to be more expensive, so that may not occur.
So moving to kind of the broader policy and platform of your campaign, a lot of the messaging so far has been in contrast with your opponent, incumbent Mayor Daniel Biss. But I wanted to ask, what are your top policy priorities coming into office? Like, what would be your day one, I want to explore this, I want to propose this, coming into office, what would you be looking at?
Well, I've based a lot of my campaign on transparency. And so I've said that underpins everything in government. So I don't know if that's a policy or just an approach, but it's something I would begin to work on day one. So transparency, openness, communication with residents, developing new avenues of communication with residents, setting that tone with city council. That would be very important for me right from the beginning. Another would be economic revitalization, particularly downtown. So how would we dive into that with perhaps some rapid analysis of what data we have available, see what other data we need, and begin gathering that, put together a task force, I believe, made of residents and business owners and building owners and resident experts and finance and marketing and a whole group and staff, of course, to take a deep dive on this and begin to develop some initiatives that begin to pull this together. You mentioned affordability. That's something I think we have to look at very, very much along the way. I think District 65 is another issue, even though that's, again, legally very separate from the city. It's an issue on a lot of minds of residents. So I think we have to see, how can we help District 65? Can we offer support? Can we broker support for them? These are some of the things that I would try to tackle from day one.
Within those areas, are there any specific policy ideas or programs that you would want to look at, or are you planning to come in kind of with a fresh slate, fresh mind, and see what's there, see what programs exist, and take it from the start?
I would very much love to see what's there and what's working. I think that would be, if something is working and going well, there may not be any reason to change that at all. So absolutely, I would begin to look at what's out there and what's working right now.
Gotcha. One of the specific proposals you have discussed is some changes to the city's 311 system. Mm-hmm. And I think this ties in with what you were talking about with communication, building new avenues. But in your questionnaire response, you wrote that you would ask to, quote, move 311 under the mayor's office. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to tease that out and ask, what do you see that specifically meaning? As far, 311 being currently a part of the police department with staffing and the communication center, what does moving it into the mayor's office specifically mean for you?
It doesn't mean actually moving necessarily. The mechanics don't worry me so much. It can live within the police department. I just think there needs to be sort of a main line of information from that service to the mayor's office to know what the issues are. And I'm certain that a lot of them are very mundane. But they're what concern residents. And when I go out there and talk to people, a couple of things keep coming up. State of the sidewalks. How often are those 311 pieces? What kind of data do we have? Do we know where they're the worst? Could we get to them? That kind of thing. The other is streetlights. Darkness. People have a lot of concerns about that. So how do we balance the history of the Talmadge lights with the need for people having more? Those are the kind of issues that are brought up on 311 that I think the mayor's office needs to hear about, just to keep track of them again and know what's on people's minds. At the moment, it's one of the most consistent ways we have of communication from residents. So it would be great to know, just even though it may be more granular than we'd like, what kind of information is coming in there.
Gotcha. And the city's current form of government, being council manager, also called a weak mayor system, the mayor doesn't necessarily have a lot of direct power or administrative power, at least, in handling some of these issues. How do you see yourself using that information and using those indicators that you talked about to actually address the issues that are brought up, streetlights, sure, whatever it may be?
Sure. It depends a little bit on what they are, but ultimately, I would work through the city manager. That's one of the primary responsibilities of the mayor, is to hold the city manager responsible for city services, resident response, all of those kinds of things. So if issues are coming up, I would certainly address that with the city manager. There's no reason to be meeting individually with staff or anything like that. I know from my corporate experience that the last thing you want in a meeting is your CEO. All right, it's just is a wet blanket on communication and ideation and discussion among staff. So if you're trying to reach a solution, it's best to let them do their jobs and come back with information.
Turning over to the question of city finances, this has come up a lot recently. On the current dais, the current term of council was able to keep the city's portion of the levy flat, property tax levy flat for the last 4 years. And you said in your questionnaire, quote, "The truth is that the city does not have a clear picture of its financial standing. I am not yet convinced there is a structural deficit," referring to the general fund reserve use and, you know, kind of
Correct.
structural deficit in spending that was brought up during the last budget cycle. Can you explain, I guess, in more detail what you mean by this, as far as like where do you think that the structural deficit could be resolved within the city's current finances without changing, the levy or any other revenue significantly?
Okay. This was one of the first things that kind of caught my attention when I began paying attention closely to city council, was the way that the finance department seemed to be able to do things that I was never allowed to do under corporate accounting. And I know municipal accounting is very different, and I know that the city budget is far more complex than what I dealt with, and much larger than what I dealt with as a department manager. But what I learned in corporate life, and what I learned more so in nonprofits, is that a budget is not about surprises. Okay, you want to know how much money you have to work with, because you want to get the very most out of that money. So you want to do good things with what you have. And I understand the concept that you estimate, when you project a budget, you estimate your expenses high and you estimate your income low. But I think we're really generous in the city, and we could sail a lot closer to the wind, for example. So the city estimated that we would get $825,000 in interest income, and I forget if that was just for the general fund or not. But we got more than $7 million. All right, so that's more than $6 million that has no home, that's unaccounted for. That's better than half of the supposed structural deficit. The other thing is that the chief financial officer, and preparing things for the audit, said, and this is of course 6 months after the end of the year, said some bills can come in late. And so I want to make sure that there's money in all of the funds. Now, this is when it's already done and you're preparing it for audit. So he says, I sprinkle money in each of those funds, so there's a little bit there in case a bill comes in. That was $7 million that was sprinkled around. That's a lot of sprinkle. And so again, if those bills did not come in, that money is also unaccounted for and now just there. And so we can tighten up because we have many needs. The needs always outweigh the amount of money available. So we want to know how much we have that we can do good work with. And so tightening that up, I think, would give us a better sense and give the city council better sense of where we are. Where are the excess reserves, and where is the money already accounted for? That we need to go to projects and this fund and that budget and whatnot, but we just need to be clearer on what's available so that we know what we can work with.
Well, thinking about like revenue coming in on that side particularly, the city has been in a unique financial, as all cities have been, in a unique financial situation over the last, say, 4 or 5 years. The COVID pandemic upended a lot of things, and then the federal aid that came from that, council has talked about that keeping things afloat for the last couple of years, but that has certainly changed now, not only from COVID relief funds expiring as expected, but now a federal government that is seemingly a lot more reticent to actually disperse and give out funds, even those they've already awarded. Mm-hmm. So do you see the financial outlook of the city changing substantially enough from that like maybe the issue that you're describing of we've lowballed revenues has gone away, and now might need to assume that it might actually be lower? Like, do you see a change in that way coming?
Likely. We don't know what the federal funding is going to do. So that, of course, makes us very cautious, and should. I think also that that trend of spending down that ARPA money is going to continue. It just isn't quite we're not at structural deficit yet, I don't think. If we continue in the rate we're going, would we get there? Yes, I just didn't see any need to start raising taxes now because we're going to have a shortage 2 years from now. That wasn't necessary. So, but I think what you mentioned with the state of finances makes it even more important that we have every dollar locked down and know exactly where we're at, because we may need to tighten the belt or screws or whatever even more if certain projects don't come through, if certain funding doesn't come through. So we need to have a really firm hand on our finances so that we can control this and adapt as best as we can.
So I'll ask you this as somebody who's still on the outside of the city government, but thinking about like
Day's not over, Alex.
Right.
Okay.
sheesh. But from the outside perspective, are there any operational efficiencies that you could point to? Like, I think that this area could be run on a tighter budget, that you're aware that you'd want to pursue. And on the side, are there any programs or services that you would be willing to cut in order to, cut or reduce in order to avoid a property tax levy increase in the coming years?
I would say that one of the first things I would do is sit down with city manager and say, tell me what's working, give me your goals. What, you've been in this job for 3+ years. What isn't working? What would you like to change? What's on your wish list? All of these kinds of things, and that would include structural, staff review, all those kinds of things. So we have some excellent staff who do great work in this city, and I would leave it to the city manager to sort of evaluate some of that and give me a report. Now, that has to be based against where we want the budget to be, and city council is in prime shape to say either we don't want a budget increase, we want flat, we'd like a reduction, or heaven forbid, we need to raise taxes to do that. But that has to be negotiated through the budget process. So I would not go in with certain things that I thought should be cut or restructured or anything like that. I need more information on that. The same is true of services as well. I would ask the very same thing. So I do not have a plan for cutting anything or reducing or eliminating anything at this point. That has to come from discussions with city manager and looking at the budget.
Yeah, and this gets at something that you brought up a little earlier about staff and working with staff on these things. You mentioned that there were actions by the finance department that you wouldn't necessarily agree with as far as how funding is accounted for. Like, how much trust do you have in as we're sitting here today, the city's current staff to provide accurate representation of the city's finances? Like, where is the balancing act between asking staff for their input on this and trusting what they give you, and pushing back on these other things that you believe are not the best representation?
That could be a really involved answer, and we could spend the best part of the afternoon here talking about that, I think, because it gets into projects as well as departmental work. I would say that this is about impressions. This is about seeing bits and pieces. And I would again trust the city manager to hold those departments accountable and go back and say, here's what I've observed. Here's what the optics are from the public side, from up in the bleachers. How do you feel about this? And what can we do about that? And try to ascertain, first of all, is everything on the up and clear and clean and as transparent and as understandable as it possibly could be. So that's where I'd start to work on this. But I wouldn't mind outside verification of some of these things. I think we look at a lot of our public works, for example, and people say, why does it cost so much? Well, municipal rules are different than city rules. So it's not just like you're hiring a contractor to redo your bathroom. There's a lot of other rules and regulations that have to be followed. And so a meeting of the minds with some of those people, I think, would be great to both verify what some of the staff projections and either financial or project-wise are, and education of some of the people in the public as well, too.
So pulling back from policy now, talking more about motivations and what brought you to this. you are a relative newcomer to city and local politics. You come from the corporate background and then in the nonprofit side. What actually brought your interest over to municipal government in the first place, and how did that lead to you deciding, okay, I'm going to throw my hat in the ring. I'd like to run for mayor?
I mentioned the financial piece that caught my eye was the very first thing. The other thing is that the number of projects that seemed to come before the city council, which were either new to the public or new to the council, and my background is project management. And so I knew that these things have been planned for weeks and months. They don't just happen like this without public input. And they were coming forward like that. And often, a couple of things were, number one, that people, what was being presented was sort of being, here's what we're going to do, here's option A, here's option B, what do you think? All right. Well, that's public reaction. That's not public input. Those are very different things. And I know from my project management work that the way you do a really successful project is to get the right people in the room right off the bat. Everybody who's got a stake in something, and especially the people that you think might be critical, that might be, have objections to what you're doing. You want to try to fold those in and accommodate them as early as possible when things are movable and things are workable. And what I saw was the city often being very resistant then to public input and not listening to residents, a stream of people coming before to the podium at city council and seemingly not being heard. And so I thought with the city resistant to input, not really having a place to go, I thought that with my leadership and managerial skills, the only way that I could sort of get ahead of things was as mayor. Because too often things just didn't seem right, that there was another agenda underneath things. That doesn't necessarily mean corruption. I'm not saying that at all. Just that there was information missing that would have made things go like this, that would have made it clearer to me as a member of the public, and that was missing. And I felt like that was the reason why I had to get involved. I spent 8 or 10 months then trying to think of every excuse I could not to be mayor. And when I ran out of those, I decided I had to run.
But you do have an existing personal connection to city politics through your relationship with sitting councilmember Claire Kelly.
Sure.
Presumably you do discuss this very big shared interest. How does, your relationship with her, talking about this, inform your views on major issues like Envision, and does it have any did it have any input in your decision to run for mayor, having somebody in your life who has a window to the inside?
It was influential, certainly, but it wasn't the tipping point, certainly like that. What I can tell you is that Claire has long ago said, you would make a great mayor. That was it. All right. She never encouraged me to go beyond that, and she never pushed me to do any of that sort of thing. So an influence, but not absolutely critical in that. Now, granted, because of my involvement with her, sure, I was brought in closer, and I started watching city council meetings that I might not have ordinarily. That's it. But beyond that, no. And so you've brought up my relationship with Claire. All right. Can I anticipate your next question of that? So, which would be that we've talked about this at length. That first of all, under transparency, we're not trying to hide anything with this. It's very out front. There's nothing in the municipal code that would prevent this. Certainly, we've looked at that. We are two different adults, and so we think differently. And so we both have a shared interest, as you said, in better government. And that's what motivates us to both stay involved here in Evanston. Now, as mayor, I know I would be held to very scrupulously keeping her time to a limit. And I would look forward to having the full force of the government behind me to back that up. And then I know also, again, that the ordinance says that if there is a conflict of interest or the appearance of a conflict of interest, that the council member must recuse themselves from that. I think that's been rather loosely interpreted by city council to this point. But if Claire were to sponsor a a referendum or referral or an ordinance, or be co-sponsoring one, and it came to the mayor as a tiebreaker. That's a very rare instance, as you know. It rarely happens. If that were to come forward, I would recuse myself from that, just based on the fact, the appearance of influence or favoritism.
Gotcha. And you did anticipate the next question, but I guess digging into that of how to address that were it to come up, the instance that you brought up of a tiebreaker is quite rare, but there are instances in the last term that it has happened. And this is a separate person from your mayoral run, but I will point out that one of the 9 council members, Juan Hedekadis, is a Northwestern employee. And so he recuses himself from anything to do with Northwestern, whether that be easy passes like the worker retention ordinance, which was 8-0 otherwise, or healthy buildings ordinance, which, if it is handled before the end of the term, may very well come down to a tiebreaker.
Mm-hmm.
As we are looking at this next term and very large and at times divisive or contentious issues come up, like, how could you assure residents that within your political elected capacity as mayor, that comes first and that you're able to handle that in spite of, or, working through this personal potential appearance of a conflict of interest? Like, it is one thing to say, like, yeah, we will address this as it comes up, but, like, what does that look like?
For the most part, it involves just separate thinking. And regardless if it's Claire or me, the council member is, she's responsible for Ward 1. All right. I'm responsible for the city. And so I'm getting much broader input than she is on a number of things. The second thing is, and this is most important, of course, as you know, is that there is an org chart in the city, and residents are at the top of it. And the mayor reports only to those residents. So I would have to be accountable first and foremost to them before I would be accountable to her, certainly, or the residents of the first ward singularly. That would be a guiding principle. And I can tell you, going out and talking to people during this campaign, how incredibly important and impressive that is, to talk to people from all around the city and get their impressions on things. That has registered with me a lot. And so I would keep that sacred if I could.
Well, pulling back and wrapping up, I guess just to ask one more final question for final thoughts. What do you want the voters of Evanston to know about you? If there's one thing that you think they should keep in mind about you as they're making their choice for who to elect mayor?
That's such an important question. And to boil it down to one thing, I guess it would be, I go back to some of the most very basic things. I love Evanston. I've lived here for 34 years. I'm not a politician. I'm your neighbor. And I want the city to thrive. And I think that we can be better than we are. I think that in a number of ways we are better than we seem to be. So I will be very happy to represent the people of this city. And the other thing that sort of has registered with me, it's finally made clear to me, is when you refer to someone who's a mayor as your honor, or a judge as your honor, what it really means. It is an honor to represent people and to be in that position of responsibility. So I welcome the opportunity, and I hope people will support me, and I'm here just for the people of Evanston.
All right. Well, thank you very much for joining us.
Pleasure. Thank you.